All right. So yesterday, while I was driving home from work, the algorithm recommended a video where they were making fun of 1984 as not being a manual for what you should do in the year 2025. And that had me start thinking about how all my favorite books are somehow built right into this podcast. My favorite books are Brave New World, 1984, Animal Farm, and there's one more. Oh, the Communist Manifesto. I throw in A People's History of the United States, a few other ones, but those are the core values that I started to be instilled in me. And I started reading these books when I was 16. The first time I read 1984, I didn't understand it. It was recommended to me by a much older girl who said I needed to start reading these types of books. And of course, I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't understand. I was too young and too naive at 16 to be reading Brave New World. My favorite parts of those books were, of course, Winston getting it on with a much younger lady and the lack of getting it on in Brave New World. Like, I didn't understand these concepts. It was a little risque for a 16-year-old boy that was very un uneducated in the ways of the world. I grew up in a very religious family, and so we didn't have any of that stuff. But it got me thinking, and that's how I ended up here doing this podcast. Because I saw that there were things that were wrong. And at the time, I didn't know how badly my life was going to go. In fact, yesterday I was talking to one of my coworkers who told me the story of how he became an adult when he was 15 years old. So we were just talking casually yesterday, and suddenly he says, "Yep, I've been on my own since I was 15." This is a guy who came home from from school. He's riding his bike, and he came home, and there were two bags sitting outside of his house, outside of his front door. And he tried his key, and his key didn't work. And so he started knocking, and his mom says, "You don't live here anymore. Take your stuff and get out." And that's how he became homeless for the first time. That's how he had to learn to live. And I was just like, "Really?" He's like, "Yep, that's how that's how my life started." And I told him that's how kind of my life started. I was 16. My mom sold the house, and that was it. Never saw anyone again. I spent my entire adult life alone. And it's kind of what drives you when you look at other people who are struggling right now because of decisions made by people who don't like poor people. You don't take away people's food stamps because you want humanity to thrive. In fact, you start taking away the things that people need because you're a piece of crap. That's why you do it. Because you enjoy the suffering of others. Because you don't want to fix problems like homelessness and low wages. You don't care because you benefit from those things. And with that said, let's get into today's script. So I asked it to work my content into the Communist Manifesto today. And so the title it gave me is You're Not Poor, You're Just Pre-Owned by Capitalism. Introductory monologue. You ever look at your bank account and think, damn, I work full time just to cosplay a, a middle class person? You're not poor because you're lazy. You're poor because rent costs more than you'll live. Sorry, I'm getting confused by the wording here. You're poor. You're poor because rent costs more than your will to live, and your job pays in stress and leftover donuts. Capitalism didn't just break the system; it sold us the broken pieces at full price. Welcome to the resale bin of the labor force. You're not broke. You're just pre-owned. Wow, that was very convoluted. I've asked it to write these scripts at different IQ levels. And when I go too high above 115, which is one standard deviation above normal, it creates things like this that sometimes are hard to say because it's trying to make it sound smart. But if I drop the scripts into 85 IQ points, then they start sounding like they're dumb. So I have to find a unique balance. In fact, today I struggled. I had to actually tell it directly to write what I asked it to write because it was making these talking points that just didn't make any sense. But that's what happens when you work with AI in script writing. You sometimes have to rein it back from the edge. So, with that said, let's get into its first talking point. You don't own your time, you rent it to the highest bidder, and even they pay late. This is something that I was thinking about yesterday as well when I was driving home. Is that at the beginning of when things started falling apart, really falling apart, the owners of businesses were talking about how no one wants to work. Well, let's fast forward that 5 years later. And we've come to a society in which no one wants to pay anymore. They want the best candidate, the most outstanding people in our society, but then want to offer you a $16 an hour wage without full time hours. In fact, I was talking to another coworker yesterday about how hard it is to live. He makes the same amount of money that I do, but he's living at home rent free and he still feels like he's struggling. And he told me that there's no way that he can pay $2,300 a month. There would be nothing left for him to be able to eat with. And I told him it's like you are very, very lucky that your parents are having pity on you, especially since they put you through engineering school. And he's been out of college, I believe, for at least 3 years now. And in those 3 years, he ended up just like me, from college straight into retail work. And that's where he's been, in and out of unpaid internships, unable to find any company that wants to pay. I was talking to another McDonald's worker yesterday, and he was really depressed about working at McDonald's, like really depressed. I've known this guy a long time, and I could just see in his face that, the question was simple. How am I going to feed my family on the same wages that you make, MillennialSteam? How am I supposed to feed my family? And I'm like, I don't know. If I had a wife, a bunch of kids, and a mortgage, I don't know what I would be doing right now. I know that I'd still be working, but when no one wants to pay anymore, what are you supposed to do in order to boost up your survivability? Because once you add kids to the equation and the wife that doesn't work, you're in a bad place. You're in a really bad place. And this is the conclusion he came to because he's been a McDonald's worker for 8 years. And yesterday, he said that his wages hadn't gone up by more than 20% in that entire time. And I was left scratching my head wondering, how is this guy even still here? I mean, he drives a used car. He seems to have a really positive attitude towards everything. And then to find out that there's no increase coming at all. It's like being on a deserted island and you're watching the ships go by every single day, and not one of them's heading your way with a bigger paycheck. Everyone somehow is expected to accept the fact that corporate America doesn't want to pay more. And if you're one of the unlucky people, well, you've already been laid off and marked off by society. Because if there's one thing that we marginalize people for in this world, it's people who don't have money. And you usually don't have money because often you'll say, oh, you don't have money because you don't have a job. You got laid off, or you quit your job because you weren't getting paid enough. But for a lot of people, they're working and they're still not getting ahead. And it just comes down to one simple thing. The money isn't there to support human life, or the quality of such life has been diminished to the point where you ask yourself, I'm going to be poor with work, but I'm going to be homeless without it. Moving on to talking point number 2. You're not broke, you're just the economic the economy's favorite hand-me-down, polished up with debt, shipped in bulk, and gently used by every boss who said, we're like family. I don't know why I'm having such a hard time reading this. I guess the structure of these sentences is kind of a little convoluted, more so than usual. Normally, they flow a lot better. But being this economy's favorite hand-me-down, that's the way I look at people who get into relationships. You're rarely going to get a fresh, new human being to get into a relationship. We're practically all used cars. Once you get into your first car, this next relationship, well, you already remember what the old one smelled like. Used cars always have that weird smell inside of them. We don't know what it is, what happened in there, but they always have a musk. And that's how our relationships are with work. Whether you're working here, there, or over there, they all have a certain smell. They all have a certain rhythm. You start out, you're not really sure what's going on, but you know how to do the job because you've done similar work like this before. In fact, I was thinking about this the other day while I was making fries at McDonald's. It's like, no matter where I go to make fries, it's going to be the same process. You take the fresh fries, you dunk them in the thing, and then they come out and they're all burnt. Repeat times any job that doesn't want to pay anything, and this is the working world. There's no escaping it. There's no alternative. You can't just go to an employer who's going to take pity on workers because that's just not going to happen. Corporations exist for one simple reason: to make a lot of money for a very few people. Everyone else can suck it. Not making enough to buy a house? Well, that's a personal failure. They always want to call you not being able to capitalize on capitalism as a personal failure, while the capitalists capitalize on your desperation in order to keep yourself alive, and even worse, to keep your family alive. That's why they exist. That's why this whole system continues to work, because money only flows up to the people that need a second or third yacht while you're figuring out what you're going to do, because it's payday and you already looked in your bank account and it's all gone. You've got about $3 to make it to your next paycheck, and you kind of just sit there and you look up. I spend a lot of time just kind of checked out, right? If you were to look at me during the day, there would be big X's in my eyeballs all day long because you don't know what else to do. The money's never going to be enough. Asking for more money, they'll consider you to be ungrateful because at least you have a job. That's the economy we live in right now. At least you have a job, because many people can't even say that. My friend whose 50-year-old husband is currently working at Chipotle, that is his only motivation to keep going, is that at least he has a job. At least he's not having to drive all day long doing DoorDash for practically no money. It is very, very hard out there. And I've said this before because I think about it all the time. It is really, really hard to make $200 right now, but it is easier than ever to drop $200 at the grocery store and get practically nothing for it. That's the worst part, is you go and you turn in your credits at the grocery store to hopefully get back enough to live off, and you're not getting it because the prices are so high. But it's just across the board. They've normalized a world in which no matter how much you work as a poor person, it's impossible to get to a point where you're going to have a savings account. It is literally impossible. That's why everyone in America right now is just one paycheck away from becoming homeless, because all you have to do is slip up. And remember, it's a personal failure. All you have to do is slip up one time, and you could be a person that's trying to figure out what you're going to do with 10 days to get out of your apartment. And if you don't believe me, go watch The Epic Economist. He made an entire video yesterday showing TikToks from people who are losing their homes because they can't pay their mortgages. America right now has a 25% people who are losing their homes because they can't pay their mortgages, because they can't find jobs to pay those mortgages. In fact, yesterday I was driving back from getting a coffee, and he had one woman who said that her rent went up by $800 in 1 month because someone bought out the the apartment complexes in her area and instantly drove up the prices for the same exact apartments. And anyone who didn't want to sign up to for that new increase and locked in into their lease for a year had to get out within 30 days. How do you, if you're scraping by and someone tells you you need to pay more for what you already have, how do you deal with that? You don't. You become homeless. That's simply put across the board, across everywhere you go. When they do that to people, they want someone in that apartment who's more desperate than you and who's willing to work much harder. You're working 3 jobs, that next person they get may not sleep at all. Or there's 20 people living in a 1 bedroom apartment. That seems to be the only way. Let's get our final talking point in here. You're not poor, you're just capitalism certified pre-owned model. High mileage, no warranty, and still expected to run like new. No health care, no food, no car, no place to live, but you're a certified pre-owned slave. And I've been saying this for years. And I'm going to keep saying it in every single video because what that says right there is you will own nothing and be happy. Because as a pre-owned slave, what value do you have? Your minimum wage. You're 16 bucks an hour on a good day. You're 14.75 on a bad day. And it's not just people who didn't go to school. It used to be that as long as you had some skills that you could pass on, that you could bypass the minimum wage. Now entry level means you. It means me. It means anyone that needs money is now considered entry level, regardless of how many years you've worked in the industry, because they don't care. No one wants to pay anymore should be on every billboard in America because only a certain few people are thriving. The people that the news tell, the same people that are telling us in the media that everything's okay. And that's actually a talking point that they had on that podcast that I was watching on the book 1984, is that they've created this narrative in the media that everything's okay. Everything's okay, and you should be okay because they're telling you everything's okay. But every time you look in your bank account and you get scared because you see how little money you have, but then they continue to repeat the same message that it's your fault. Everything is good. You are just the exception to the fact that everyone else is doing well. Well, I'll tell you this much. I live in an apartment complex where I know my neighbors aren't doing well. And to quote or paraphrase the epic economist, when your neighbors smell your turkey on Thanksgiving in 2 weeks, they may come sniffing around to see if they can get some. And you can add to that whatever you want, but that's the world we're living in, where people don't have enough. And if you have resources, well, I wouldn't be cooking any turkey on Thanksgiving this year, even if I could, which I don't, but I wouldn't. All right, let's close out this monologue. So no, it's not you. You're not failing. You were handed a rigged blueprint, told to just work harder and then charge monthly for the privilege of existing. You're not poor. You're pre-owned by capitalism. High mileage, no benefits, and still expected to smile during the performance reviews. But hey, maybe the real wealth was the sarcasm we weaponized along the way. Stay broke, stay bright, stay dangerous. I'm going to end this video by talking about what Target said to their employees this week. You must smile at the customers, regardless of how you feel. You must pretend everything is okay while you're at work. You're not allowed to cry at work. You're allowed to cry in the parking lot. At work, you must smile, have an upbeat attitude, and never give away the fact of your true suffering. The Soul Suck 5000 is slowly crushing your soul all day long. but you're not allowed to whimper. You're not allowed to say that it hurts. When a fleece shows up, like he does religiously, you're not allowed to say no. I'm going to just draw the line. No, it doesn't work that way. Capitalism has to extract your soul right from your rear end, and it doesn't give it back at the end of the day. And the fact, and this is quoting a coworker, the fact that it still hurts means that you still have some remnants of your soul when you come back to work at 8 a.m. the next day. They can't take all of it, but they've taken most of it. Because as we accept this decline in the quality of life, and we expect it to decline to the point where we don't even care anymore, that's where they need the proletariat. They need you to completely give up and just accept this as the new reality that life will always be bad if you're not rich.